Rockefeller. For over a century, the name has meant power, and not just the kind that buys politicians. The Rockefellers shaped industries, crushed competitors, and wrote the rules of wealth in America. Oil, banking, politics, philanthropy. If it touched power, the family touched it first. Their name was stamped on skyscrapers, carved into the foundations of museums, whispered in the backrooms of global power. But in 1961, one of their own, Michael Rockefeller, traded boardrooms and ballrooms for the steaming jungles of New Guinea. He wasn't just sightseeing, he was hunting for something exotic and priceless. Asmat tribal art, the kind that museums drooled over and the Wall Street heirs could collect like trophies. But then, he vanished. The official story was clean, respectable. He drowned after his boat capsized. A tragic accident. End of story. Except, there was a photograph, one the world wasn't supposed to see. So what really happened to Michael Rockefeller? And why was the truth covered up? Let's try and find out.
Hello, I'm Mike Droberg, a Marine Corps veteran and filmmaker, and we will try to answer these questions on today's episode of Forgotten History.
In the fall of 1961, Michael Rockefeller was already living the dream of adventure most men only read about. Son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller and heir to the largest fortunes in history, Michael had studied anthropology, collecting tribal art for New York's new Museum of Primitive Art. His fascination with the Asmat people wasn't academic, it was personal. The Asmat people lived in one of the most remote corners of the world, the vast swamplands and rainforests of Papua's southern coast, stretching across more than 10,000 square miles of mangrove channels and tidal rivers. Numbering around 70,000 to 100,000 people, the Asmat were divided into dozens of clans and village groups, each with their own chief, warriors, and elaborate spiritual traditions. Their world was untouched by Western law, and power wasn't measured in wealth or land. It was measured in skulls. For the Asmat, life and death were bound together in ritual. Headhunting raids were not acts of random violence, but central to their cultural identity, tied to ideas of balance, vengeance, and honoring the spirits. To take a head was to restore cosmic order after a death in the tribe, and to bring vitality back to one's own people. Cannibalism, far from being a rumor or exaggeration, was part of these ceremonies. The act of consuming an enemy was believed to absorb his strength, courage, and spiritual power. Geographically isolated by thick jungles, treacherous rivers, and malarial swamps, the Asmat developed a fierce warrior society that resisted outside influence well into the 20th century. To outsiders, their reputation was terrifying. To themselves, it was sacred. The jungle was their shield, their canoe fleets their weapons, and their rituals the beating heart of their existence. However, just 3 years earlier, in 1958, Dutch colonial troops had entered the region to enforce peace between warring villages. The official line was that they were breaking up a headhunting raid, but in the village of Asmat, the confrontation turned bloody. Dutch soldiers and Papuan police opened fire, killing several Asmat warriors, including respected leaders. To the Dutch, it was a security operation. To the Asmat, it was an unforgivable offense, a spiritual wound that demanded payment in blood. In their belief system, only the death of someone of equal value could settle the score. Then, on November 17, 1961, Michael Rockefeller pushed off the shore in a narrow dugout canoe, its bow weighed down with priceless Asmat carvings. the very treasure he had traveled halfway around the world to find. At his side was Rene Wassing, a 34-year-old Dutch anthropologist, along with two Asmat guides. They hugged the jagged southwest coast of New Guinea, a coastline notorious for its treacherous tides and sudden storms. But the canoe was too heavy, overloaded with artifacts, food, and gear. As the sea grew restless, white caps crashed against the bow. Within minutes, the dugout began to flood. The men bailed furiously, but eventually the ocean won. A wall of water rolled over them, swamping the craft. In an instant, the carved shields, drums, and spears that Rockefeller had spent weeks bartering for the very purpose of his expedition were swept away into the depths of the sea. All that remained was a half-sunken boat, 4 men adrift, and 3 miles of open water between them and the hostile shore. The two Asmat guides immediately swam for help, leaving Rockefeller and Wassing clinging to the overturned canoe. They drifted for nearly 24 hours under a punching tropical sun. Then, on the morning of November 19th, Rockefeller made a fateful decision. Strapping 2 empty gasoline cans to his waist for buoyancy, he told Wassing, "I think I can make it." He slid into the water and began swimming toward the distant tree line. Wassing never saw him again. The following day, a Dutch patrol boat rescued Wassing. The search for Rockefeller began, and the official narrative would be written before it ever had a chance to uncover the truth. The official story was clean. Michael Rockefeller drowned at sea. No body, no witnesses, just gone. But for decades, whispers told another version. A version the Dutch colonial authorities and the Rockefeller family had no interest in confirming. The people living on that coast were the Asmat, not a single tribe, but a network of over 100 fiercely independent villages. Rockefeller had spent months traveling among them. He knew some of them personally. Many he had traded with, for bish poles, shields, and drums. He had shared tobacco, steel tools, and cloth. In several villages, he was a welcomed guest. But the Achtenep, the village tied to the blood debt theory, was different. He hadn't spent significant time there, and in Asmat culture, friendship in one village didn't guarantee safety in another, especially one with a vendetta against foreigners. Missionary accounts say that's exactly what happened. Father Cornelius van Kessel later reported hearing from the locals that a white man had washed ashore near Achtenep, exhausted but alive. The Asmat took him in briefly. Then, following ancient law, warriors speared him to death. His body was butchered, and parts were eaten in a ritual act to absorb his spirit and settle the debt. Another missionary, Father Hubertus van Piege, heard the same story and even named the men involved. But Dutch officials made it clear, such accounts were not to be published, not to be repeated. And then there was a photograph. In the early 1960s, an Australian patrol officer snapped an image of Asmat men in ceremonial dress. On the edge of the frame sat a man with pale skin, his features blurred, but his hair and his build eerily similar to Michael Rockefeller's. If the image was real, and taken after November 19, 1961, it would shatter the official story. The Dutch dismissed it, the Rockefeller family stayed silent, and the photo disappeared into archives, only to re-emerge decades later in books and documentaries. If Michael Rockefeller died on that shore, it wasn't an accident. It was an execution, one carried out in accordance with tribal law and quietly buried by colonial law. That version of events was a nightmare for the Dutch colonial administration. In 1961, they were clinging to their last scraps of power in New Guinea. News that a Rockefeller had been speared and eaten on their watch would humiliate them internationally, reinforce the image of New Guinea as savage and ungovernable, and risk inflaming Asmat resistance, so they shut it down. Missionary testimonies were quietly filed away. Patrol reports that mentioned a white man in Achtenep vanished from official archives. and officers were reminded of their duty to protect the reputation of the administration. The Rockefeller family played their part too. Publicly, they accepted the drowning story. Privately, they had every reason to avoid a scandal that would plaster Michael's death across the front pages with words like cannibalism in the headline. Years later, Dutch sources admitted what was obvious. There had been no serious investigation into the cannibalism rumors because they didn't want an answer. The colonial government needed to maintain the image of control, and the Rockefellers needed to preserve the image of the family. And Michael, he became an unsolved mystery, his last hours sealed away, not by the jungle, but by human hands. The official version of Michael Rockefeller's death has never changed. He drowned at sea. No body, no proof. Just a polite obituary for a young man who died pursuing his passion. But the rumors never died. Over the decades, journalists, filmmakers, and adventurers retraced his last journey. Some uncovered oral histories from the Asmat elders that matched the missionary's account almost word for word. Others found ceremonial objects in oxygen that carved from what locals hinted were human bones, though they would never name the man. The last photo resurfaced in investigative books and documentaries, sparking a new wave of debate. Was it really Rockefeller, or just a light-skinned tribesman caught in bad lighting? The Dutch administration had dissolved in 1962, and no one in power seemed eager to confirm or deny. Today, the Asmat no longer practice headhunting or cannibalism. Those rituals ended in the 1970s under Indonesian rule. But elders still remember the time a foreign man swam into their world and never swam back out. For some, Michael Rockefeller's story is a cautionary tale about crossing cultural boundaries you don't understand. And for others, he's a victim of a cover-up that spanned continents. Do you think the photo proves Michael Rockefeller's last moments, or is the truth still in hiding? Let us know in the comments below.
Thank you for watching Forgotten History. Please like, share, and subscribe. If you have any comments or show ideas, we'd love to hear from you. Thanks again.